The team that could easily, of anybody, pencil themselves into the 12-team playoff is Notre Dame. College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. I believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again. Welcome into the program, everybody. I'm Joel Klatt. This is the Joel Klatt Show, and we are presented by Hampton by Hilton. Listen, folks, a lot of people listening this week, and we know why, because we love college football. Week one, there's been a lot of reaction, so thank you for joining us here in week one reaction to the college football season. We've got a lot to get into today. I'm going to have 4 freshmen that I thought played incredible. Some thoughts still on Oregon that I never got to, Florida State that I never got to. Plus, I'm going to have Brady Quinn on. Brady Quinn, of course, of Big Noon Kickoff, my colleague at Fox Sports. He's going to come on and we're going to review a little bit more about that Notre Dame win, as well as start to preview and look ahead towards the giant game that we'll be at on Saturday as Big Noon Saturday and Big Noon Kickoff. Head to Ann Arbor for the Michigan-Texas showdown this Saturday on Fox. So that's what we got going on. Remember, rate, review us wherever you're at. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got some exclusive YouTube content coming out this week. I'm going to have a film study of the Michigan offense coming out this week that you're definitely going to want to see. And if you're just an audio listener, sorry, got to go to YouTube in order to check out that film study. So get over there, subscribe to the show, and invite a friend. Get in the comments down below. Here's what I want to do with these 4 freshmen. Okay, we're going to play a little bit of a game called If This, Then That. Okay, again, if this, then that. With 4 freshmen who had big games in week one. And to be fair, one of them is a redshirt freshman, but they are all still technically freshmen. So we're going to go with 4 freshmen. Let's start with the one that I think is kind of the biggest of all of them. And maybe it doesn't turn into the biggest, but it certainly could. And let's start with Nebraska true freshman quarterback Dylan Raiola. So Dylan Raiola went out and he was 19 of 27 for 238 yards, 2 touchdowns in his first career game as a starter against UTEP. So what is the if then that? Well, if he is just a net positive for Nebraska, then Nebraska will be playing meaningful games for the CFP when it comes to November. That's actually the standard. You see, everyone has been talking about Dylan Raiola being possibly the savior for Nebraska, and he's going to, rescue them and so on and so forth. But here's the thing. If you actually study them and watch them and see what they did a year ago, you'll see that this team was very close a year ago. And they had, I would say, a net negative quarterback play. If they don't turn it over last year, they're a far different team from a record standpoint. They are 3 to 4 wins better. Think of it this way. Nebraska was minus 17 last year in the turnover margin. Minus 17. That's worst in the Power 5 a year ago. Nebraska lost 5 games by 1 score last year. 5 by 1 score. 4 of those were by 3 points. And the other was an overtime loss to Wisconsin. And in those games, they had 16 turnovers. 14 were by the quarterback. So all you have to do is extrapolate that out and say, if Dylan Raiola is just a net positive and not a net negative, if he's just taking care of the football, those probably turn into wins. Again, 16 turnovers just in those 1-score losses from a year ago. 14 by the quarterback. That gets cleaned up. There's no doubt with the schedule ahead of them that they'll be playing meaningful games as it relates to the college football playoff in November. It was a bit of a wait and see for me after that first game, and he showed some flashes. So, yeah, I think he's really good. But again, let's just peel it back and actually say what it is. If he's just a net positive, then Nebraska is playing meaningful games in November when it relates to the college football playoff. So how big is this game against Colorado this week at home in Lincoln? I think it's the difference between them having a loss or 2 before Ohio State and probably being undefeated if they go into Ohio State. You see, if they lose to Colorado, they're likely going to be in another 1-score game against, like, let's say a Rutgers team that's vastly improved under Greg Schiano. So then you could say like, well, if they lose to Colorado, they could probably lose another one before they get to Ohio State. But if they beat Colorado at home, then there's no one else that really scares you because they've put themselves on a level where they can beat two extraordinary players in Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. So then all of a sudden you're looking at that schedule and you think to yourself, yeah, they're absolutely going to be a 7-0 team going to Columbus. So these are the 6 games that they have Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana. Then the last 5 get much tougher, but then they're in it. They're in the thick of it. Now, remember, I didn't say if Dylan Raiola doesn't turn it over, they're going to the playoff. I say they're playing games that will be meaningful as it relates to the playoff. They would go to Ohio State. They're certainly not going to be favored in that game. UCLA is a team that they should beat. And then they've got 3 games at USC, Wisconsin, and at Iowa. They would be a 1-loss team at that point. They would likely be 8-1. And then it's a coin flip. If you can go 2-1 in those games and you're a 10-win team, you not only are going to have an outside shot to be the 2nd seed in the Big Ten and go to the championship game, but probably an outside shot to be in the college football playoff. So that's why this is such a huge development in Nebraska and for all of college football. Because if Dylan Raiola is just a net positive for that offense, then all of a sudden they're going to be playing those last 3 with a lot on the line. So that's my number 1. Number 2, Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. He, all spring, everyone was talking about him, and rightly so. And they've been trying to even slow down some of this hype for Jeremiah Smith. And he was very hyped coming in. And, obviously Ryan Day giving the relief at the podium when he finally committed and sent his letter of intent into the Woody, as they call it, the Woody Hayes Center. He had 6 catches for 92 yards and 2 touchdowns against Akron. And yeah, those aren't going to blow your mind, but some of the catches that he made did. And in particular, because of the style of catches that they were going to him for, which was if you're 1-on-1, you're getting the ball. So that tells you everything that you need to know about the belief that Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and Will Howard have in Jeremiah Smith. Because even their quarterback, Will Howard, was saying he's the type of player that if he's got 1-on-1 coverage, the ball is going to him. It's going to Jeremiah Smith. So then what does that mean? Well, if he's him, as the kids say, then he will be the tide that rises all boats for Ohio State and their offense. If he wasn't going to be him, then all of a sudden you can start to cheat as a defense and you can commit resources to stopping the run and you can make Will Howard's life much more difficult. But if Jeremiah Smith is him, like he started to prove against Akron in some of those 1-on-1 situations, now you've got a problem as a defense because he's probably commanding a double team, which means the safety is high. If the safety's high, then guess what? You can block everybody in the run front, at least to that side of the football. And that run game with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, and even Will Howard himself, can start to get loose. If you've got to double Jeremiah Smith and keep a safety over him, guess who's single covered or doesn't have the ratios? Emeka Egbuka. So now all of a sudden he becomes the tide that starts to rise all boats. Now, normally we talk about that in terms of quarterback play. And listen, I get it. Wide receivers are generally a dependent position. But when he's impacting the structure of the defense before the ball is snapped, he becomes the tide. We saw it a little bit with Marvin Harrison, but I think this is even different. More different because they're having to commit resources over there. It reminds me a lot of, do you remember the Patriot teams with Gronk and Edelman? Those guys were such matchup nightmares that what ended up happening is they would just sit in a formation. They did this in the Super Bowl. They did this in the AFC Championship against the Chiefs. I remember they would just sit in kind of a basic empty formation where Gronk was singled over there and Edelman was in the slot. And then Brady would just decide based on the ratios where the ball was going to go. So at that point and moment, an experienced quarterback or play caller like Chip Kelly or Will Howard can then say, hey, defense, run whatever you want. You will tell me where the ball is going. But you can only do that if you have guys that are matchup nightmares like a Gronk or like a Jeremiah Smith. So that's why I say he could be the tide that rises the boat level of the Ohio State offense. I don't think this offense is even going to need to score 40 points because of what they do on defense and how good they can be on defense. But I guarantee you this, if he's him, then watch out because that offense can be explosive. Let's go to number 3. Tennessee quarterback. How about this? I mean, Nico Iamaleava. I believe I said that. Iamaleava. If he's the real deal, then Tennessee is going to be the 2022 version of Tennessee and not the 2023 version. Nico looked incredible. Granted, it was Chattanooga, and I understand that. But a lot of people, listen, you could say the same thing about Akron, for Jeremiah Smith. These are young guys that are getting a chance to play. Now, I know that Iamaleava played in the bowl game, but man, if this guy is the real deal, then Tennessee becomes a factor, and they become a 2022 version of Tennessee, which was a problem in the SEC. Nico Iamaleava, I'm just going to say it until it's ingrained in my head. Iamaleava was 22 of 28, 314 yards, 3 touchdowns, all in the first half. So that's incredible stuff. And it wasn't just that he put up huge numbers. His wide receivers weren't having to adjust a lot. You watch him, and I watched some of the film and some of the highlights. He was throwing the ball so accurately, driving it down the field. Our colleague on Big Noon Kickoff, and remember, Brady Quinn's coming up later in the show, but our other colleague and quarterback, Matt Leinart, has known Nico for a long time because Nico's a Southern California kid. Matt's a Southern California guy, obviously, so he's seen him throw from a young age. Matt has always said that Nico is one of, if not the most impressive young passers of the football that he's seen, and that came to fruition on the field for Tennessee. So now all of a sudden, Tennessee makes it a really deep race in the SEC. Very similar to what Miller Moss has now made USC and D'Anton Lynn has made USC. So if USC is real, now all of a sudden the top of the Big Ten becomes much different and more difficult. I was stuck between different and difficult there, but difficult is what I was looking for. We know this intuitively. Well, the same thing can be applied in the SEC to Tennessee. Very similar to what USC is doing over there. That becomes a problem. And now all of a sudden, their schedule, which is very difficult, they've got Georgia on there. They've got Alabama. They've got Oklahoma. And now it becomes a huge problem for those teams. How do those teams navigate Tennessee? Because if Nico is really this good, then this is a version of Tennessee that can go and compete for a spot in the SEC championship game. That becomes a really, really good team. And now you know why they were so aggressive with him in recruiting, because he seems, at least through one game, to be that guy. Last one, as far as a freshman goes, if this, then that we're playing, is Alabama wide receiver Ryan Williams. If Ryan Williams, if he is this good, then Kalen DeBoer has answers at wide receiver for the Tide, which is not what they've had in the last 2 years. If you were to ask me what has been the biggest difference between Alabama's teams the last 2 years and the ones previous to that, and in particular when you get to that 2020, 19, 18, you're used to seeing, you can go all the way back to like Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Jamison Williams out there. And they haven't had that the last couple of years. They just have not. Now, if Ryan Williams becomes him, if you will, then all of a sudden they are back in that mold and they have an elite playmaker on the outside. And now they have it not with, some random offensive coordinator. I know all those guys didn't have random offensive coordinator. You had Kiffin in there, you had Sark in there, but now you've got Kalen DeBoer. Think Rome Odunze. Look at what DeBoer does with elite wide receivers. He just took Washington and went to the national championship game. I know Penix was outstanding, but a lot of that was the fact that he had great elite wide receiver play. So if Ryan Williams is an elite player on the outside, watch out for Alabama, because Kalen DeBoer specifically knows what to do with a room like that. Ryan Williams could grow into that. He could be DeBoer's new Odunze, and that's scary for everybody. So 4 freshmen that if then that, these guys are very good, man. Very good. I do want to give a quick shout out to a couple of other performances that they weren't freshmen, but they deserve a shout out. Ashton, Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. If this guy is going to be that good and productive, then Boise State's going to have a great chance to not only maybe knock off Oregon this week, but certainly represent the smaller schools in the college football playoff. Teteairoa McMillan went off for Arizona. That guy is one of the premier players in all of college football, and certainly a guy that I think a lot of. So those performances, I just got to at least mention out of week one, along with those freshmen that kind of burst on the scene. Brian Williams, man, elite. All these guys are elite. And there was some other ones in there too that I just couldn't get to. Let's see. Let's go to Oregon. Should we be concerned about Oregon? Should we be concerned about Oregon? They beat Idaho from the FCS 24-14. And it's like, on one hand, we're saying like, hey, Oklahoma State played pretty well. And hey, even if Colorado didn't look great and made some mistakes, they at least beat North Dakota State, which wasn't an easy game. This is kind of that regional style game. And yet it feels way different. And so the answer to me for should we be concerned about Oregon is yes. I actually have major concerns for Oregon. 24-14, they were favored in this game by as much as 49.5, and they were in one, folks, like in one. The offensive line was only replacing 2 starters. So you've got to think to yourself like, okay, they've got 3 returning starters. They should be good, but they're trying to replace their center, Jackson Powers Johnson. And everybody knows, or at least if you've followed Oregon or if you've heard Dan Lanning talk about his club, you'll know that Jackson Powers Johnson was a big loss for them. But here's what's more concerning is that they had 3 starters back and Idaho sacked them 3 times. Now you might be thinking to yourself like 3 sacks is not a ton, but it sure is when last year you gave up 5 total sacks on the year. 5 total sacks. Now that's not, Dylan Gabriel is a quick release, get the ball out of his hands. He is. He's not sitting there holding the ball, taking a lot of sacks. This is not a difference between Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. This is all of a sudden this offensive line getting beat up front. They gave up 3 sacks. They gave up 5 sacks total on the year last year, and they give up 3 to FCS Idaho. That is not good. They ran it for under 3 yards per carry. So yes, alarm bells should be going off heavily around Oregon and their offensive line specifically. This is not something that's all that sustainable if you're talking about the expectations that Oregon is bringing to the table. Now, if you're just thinking to yourself like, well, Oregon will get better and they'll be fine. Okay, that's one thing. But remember, Oregon was a lot of people's national champion pick. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, like, why are you unconcerned about Michigan and you're more concerned about Oregon? All of that has to do with the expectation level and the fact that Michigan doesn't mind winning this way. Oregon was a 49.5-point favorite and won by 10 and averaged under 3 yards per carry against FCS Idaho, who sacked them 3 times when last year they gave up 5 total sacks on the season. That is alarming. This has got to get better, and it's got to get better in a big way and fast. They play Boise State. They host Boise State this weekend. Did you know Boise State has never lost to Oregon? Oregon's 0-3 against Boise State in their history. 0-3. There was the 08-09 or 07-08 back-to-back home and home, and then there was a bowl game in 2017. Boise beat them each time. One of those was the LeGarrette Blount game in Boise. They have to face Michigan's defensive line. They've got to face Ohio State's defensive line. They have to play better than this up front. We thought that this was going to be a team that was going to be able to go out there and handle their business at the line of scrimmage, certainly against an FCS opponent. So Oregon is concerning. There's no other way to put it other than that. That offensive line has got to get better. Another team that is in real trouble, and maybe just like the alarm bells have turned off and it's like the lights have gone out, and that's Florida State. If we look at, history in college football, and I like to do this, what we'd see is that at least one preseason top 10 team has finished unranked in 16 of the last 17 seasons. And we found this year's team. All right. They're not coming back from this. You don't lose to Georgia Tech and Boston College in the way that you lost to them and come back from this if you're Florida State. And I guess we shouldn't really be surprised. It's like TCU from last year. FSU has been very reliant on the transfer portal. And guess what? Last year's group had major difference makers that were transfers, and now they're gone. Keon Coleman from Michigan State, Brady Fisk from Western Michigan, Jared Verse from Albany, Trey Benson from Oregon. They were all there for 2 years as transfers, but are gone now. Not all of them, but a few of those were 2 years. And now they're all gone. They've got to replace Jordan Travis. And then all of a sudden, DJU is clearly a drop-off. So there's a problem. This is the problem when you're playing with the fire that is the transfer portal. Now, in some cases, it can heat your whole home. It's unquestionably just like that old Christian Laettner line from Mike Krzyzewski. Mike Krzyzewski used to say, like, Christian Laettner was like the furnace. If he's controlled, he can heat the whole home. He can make everything go. But the furnace can also burn the home down. Well, that's the transfer portal in college football. If it's done right, it can heat the whole home. But if it gets out of control, it burns it down, and it can do it quickly. And we're seeing that. And then this is even more evidence, like we talked about with Clemson, that if you miss on a quarterback, and by the way, in this case, it seems to be missing with the same guy, DJU. I hate it for him, but it's certainly not the type of play that we were expecting out of DJ Uiagalelei. They went heavy in the portal again this year. They had 17 transfers. They had the number 7 ranked class, but it isn't paying off for them. It's just not. And that's the downside. If you're going to play that way, if you miss at quarterback, if you have a couple of misses, now all of a sudden you're out of luck. And that seems to be what's happening with Florida State. Why? Because these teams aren't just like beating them with 5 turnovers. They're dominating them. Boston College outgained them, had more first downs, had less turnovers. They had the time of possession battle. Like Boston College thoroughly beat Florida State in Tallahassee. Big credit to Bill O'Brien. How about Bill O'Brien and the BC Eagles? Maybe Boston College is just way better than we give anybody credit, and they're going to be there right in the end. By the way, Georgia Tech might be in the same boat. Georgia Tech plays Syracuse this week. Syracuse looked good all of a sudden. Now, all of a sudden, these teams are trying to rise in the ACC while the favorites or preseason favorites are faltering, except for Miami. Florida State faltering, Clemson faltering, North Carolina State did not play great. Virginia Tech lost to Vanderbilt. And yet you've got these other teams that are starting to build. Maybe they're better than we think. Maybe the Cuse is going to go on a run. The Cuse have one of the easiest schedules in all of the country. There's a chance Syracuse goes 9-0 until some late games in the season. You know, like there's that chance. We see the imbalance in schedule, and it's out there. Georgia Tech could be a lot better. And how about BC? That was not a fluke. Give Bill O'Brien a lot of credit. That team played really, really hard. All right, here's what I want to do. I want to bring in our colleague, my colleague, and the esteemed Brady Quinn from Big Noon Kickoff. So here we go. Let's bring in Brady. So without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Brady Quinn joins the show. Brady, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm doing great. I mean, I finally got on the Joel Klatt show. Some people call it JKS. I'm just sad it was the week after Josh Payne. I really thought I would be able to get on the show before Josh Payne.
Those of you that don't know, Brady threw some shade out on social media. He was just like, "What?" to him and Matt, like, "What do we got to do to get an invite?" And so you got the pity invite the next week. Congratulations.
And I took it. So that's how pathetic I am. For those of you that don't realize this, I've actually worked with Josh Pate. I know Josh well. Great dude. We see him on the road. In fact, we might be seeing him this week, I think, Joel.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume anyone that travels to games is coming to this game.
You'd hope so. And if they're not, I mean, I'm not really sure what you're doing in college football. So
I agree. Brady and I are going to be in Ann Arbor for the Michigan-Texas game. Before we get to that, and I do want to talk about that, in particular, kind of this Michigan possible 2-quarterback system that we saw against Fresno State in week 1. I have to get your thoughts, though, on your boys. I mean, I was high on Notre Dame in the preseason. I know you were as well, but there was some cautious optimism, in particular with the youthful offensive line. That performance in College Station, I thought was maybe not remarkable, but man, it was impressive what they did. What were your thoughts on that win?
I would just describe that win as the culmination of what has occurred over the past 3 years for Marcus Freeman and his staff. And so I'll start with Marcus. if you have looked at the past couple of years, you really saw the growth in this game as far as how the fourth quarter played out. And I think it speaks volumes to how the game started, his emotion, how he led the team on the field. A lot of those clips are going viral,
Yeah.
and how he's constructed his staff and really everyone. I'm including the strength coach as well. But the bedrock of this team, and he's a defensive minded coach, former defensive player. So you kind of figured that's usually where his bread and butter is going to be. And that's what he's done by getting a guy in Al Golden, who they extended this offseason, making sure they retained him. But he applies a scheme that plays to the personnel. They put so much pressure on opposing quarterbacks with the different coverage looks, blitz looks, pressure looks, fronts and things that they do. And they're able to do that because they've got Ben Morrison out there. They've got Xavier Watts. They've got Christian Gray. So it's a combination of, to me, what Marcus has been able to do with his staff, coupled with his recruiting and building it off the foundation he knows on defense.
Yeah, and the surprising part would be on the offensive side, because I agree with you, that defense, and I think that we would probably say we both expected the defense to play really well. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
I said A&M was going to score 9 points. They ended up 13, so right around there. But the surprising part probably was on the offensive side. You agree?
Yes, and then for a number of reasons, but I guess not so much in this sense. Is Notre Dame's got an identity now on offense. Like if I said to you right now, what is Notre Dame going to recruit, going to develop, and going to pump off into the NFL? You'd probably say offensive line, tight end, and running back right now. Is that fair?
It's totally fair. And that's it. In that order, I would say. Well, maybe O-line first, but yeah, tight end, O-line, line of scrimmage, and then running backs. And that's exactly what they featured in the second half, and in particular in the fourth quarter.
And I think, for some people who, there's always going to be criticism, right? You're the Notre Dame quarterback. There's going to be national attention. There's going to be criticism. And I think there was some concern, like, hey, we all know Riley Leonard's a good athlete. He's a dual threat athlete, but like, what's he going to be like in the passing game? I'm going to take people back. Remember, he missed the spring game. This was the first really true live action, like in a stadium, in an environment like that, with this team, in this offense, with this group. So whatever your preconceived notions were, or your after game thoughts of the passing game is, just pump the brakes. Like, this is week one. Like, I dare you, like, talk to me after week 2, talk to me after week 3. It's only going to get better from here. I mean, you have a number of transfers too, and Bo Collins, who came from Clemson, Chris Mitchell from South Florida, or excuse me, FIU, but from the South Florida area. You have a bunch of people who are added into this offense that he's still developing chemistry with because of the injury he was coming off of through the spring. And mind you, the offensive line, as we kind of touched on how youthful that group is and going up against that front. So they leaned heavily on their identity. And I thought the best thing was the way Marcus managed the game. And I think the way, Mike Denbrock, who had been there before, by the way, and really made it a kind of a perfect fit, put together a game plan to allow Riley Leonard to make a big third down throw for a first down, and then kind of push and isolate Bo Collins to give him an opportunity to make a big play along with the big running plays. So those are the two things, I think, when you look at the staff and what he's constructed. And the last thing I'll say is this. Did you see the shot of Connor Wigman throwing up during the game?
Yes. As he's walking, and you can tell he's trying not to, and then it's just like, bleh. Yeah.
So you know this because, you're from Colorado, but Notre Dame hired Lauren Landau, who's arguably one of the best strength conditioning coaches I think I've ever been around. I mean, I was around him at the Denver Broncos, even back before he was coaching for the Denver Broncos.
Yep. I was with him in draft prep, like before he was with the Broncos. So he trained me. He trained a lot of the Denver Bronco guys for a long time. He's really good.
He's better than really good. Again, I'd put him up against like Mickey Marotti, who I had back when I was college, who now is at Ohio State. But the general point is this: when it came down to it in the fourth quarter, it wasn't Notre Dame who looked like the team that couldn't handle the heat and humidity and everything else in that environment down in Texas. It was Texas A&M who didn't look like they were in shape, who got leaned on and eventually ended up getting worn on. And so, again, that's a credit to Lauren Landau. But going back to the initial point, it's a credit to Marcus Freeman and the job he's done of constructing all of this entire ecosystem, this program at Notre Dame, to be able to display the growth that he's had as a head coach, but the program's had over his tenure so far. So I don't want to make too much of one game, but I thought it was a pretty defining moment for him in particular.
Well, listen, I'm going to make a lot of that game because there's not a lot of tough ones left. And so that's why that game was so important. And obviously it behooves them if A&M goes on and has some success in the SEC. It actually behooves Notre Dame that USC played well against LSU and got a win in week 1, because now with Florida State falling off the face of the earth, at least they've got kind of this bookend of quality opponents at the beginning of the season, hopefully in A&M, and then at the end of the season in USC. Brady, of all the teams in week 1, Miami looked good. All these teams looked great. You could say Georgia, yeah, pencil them in. No. The team that could easily, of anybody, pencil themselves into the 12-team playoff is Notre Dame. You start thinking about that schedule, taking care of your own business. I just don't see them losing more than one game. I don't see it.
I don't either. I said before the season, even back when we thought Texas A&M and Florida State and the challenges those would be, and obviously they got past A&M, but even looking at Florida State right now, which is just seems like a mess, I still felt like the floor was 11-1 with this team. I felt like they've got one of the best defenses in the country. Their offense with Mike Denbrock back and the way he could scheme things up to get the ball to the playmakers, and Riley Leonard, who's a veteran, capable enough of handling all of this. I really felt confident in their ability to, at minimum, go 11-1, if not 12-0. That's how the schedule sets up. So the next step for them is to not get tripped up by the Georgia Techs, the Louisville. So we'll probably both ranked by the time they play them. I think Georgia Tech's ranked in the AP poll now, and have those games where they stumble, kind of like they did last year versus Louisville, and almost getting beat by Duke. That's the next step, is now being able to be the hunted and being able to handle that as they move forward and maintaining that number 5 spot. Because as you said it, this thing sets up very easily for Notre Dame to be hosting a first round playoff game. And I can't wait to see what that environment's going to be like.
There's no doubt. And I was speaking of this earlier in the show before you came on, in terms of Nebraska, this idea that when you're building a program, and Marcus Freeman wasn't building a program, and this goes all the way back to Bobby Bowden, who used to talk about, with a program, you got to lose big before you lose small. You're going to lose small before you win small. You win small before you win big. Maybe that's the maturation we've seen over the last couple of years, that winning small last year is going to turn into winning big. At least that's what Irish fans will hope for. Let's move on to our game. Huge game in Ann Arbor as Michigan takes on Texas. It is a 3-hour edition of Big Noon Kickoff. That's right, 3-hour edition. So 9 a.m. Eastern, the lovely and talented Brady Quinn is going to be gracing your televisions on Fox, and you got to be there because it's going to be a really cool show. It's going to be a huge show as we prep for that game. Now, Big Noon Kickoff, you'll be there. The guys will be there. Charles Woodson will be there. We've got a lot of stuff going on. And then we get to the game. And Brady, I'm watching the film of each of these teams. Texas knows exactly who they are. They know exactly what they want to do and how they want to attack. And then there's Michigan. And you watch that offensive game tape and you're like, okay, they are still in absolute figure it out mode. And that starts with the quarterbacks. They go with Davis Warren, the former walk-on, which, by the way, don't disparage because got to hang with my walk-ons. And then Alex Orji sparingly, by the way, only 2 snaps in the first half. It's not even like they had a real 2-quarterback system, but they were parsing him in there at times. What do you think we're going to see from Michigan offensively?
I wonder if Michigan was holding some stuff back. And the only reason I say that is I'll never forget, and this happens to a fault at times, by the way. It happened to me my sophomore year. We were playing BYU in Provo to open the season. Week 2 was against Michigan. And they were going to be, I believe, a top 10 ranked team at that point in time, maybe even top 5. And our entire training camp towards the end, we had prepared for Michigan. Then we get out to Provo. They're running a 3-3-5 defense. It was tough for our offensive line to adjust, tough for me to adjust. You see the field a lot differently in that case. End up losing, stumble. Now we come back to beat Michigan the next week, but we had kind of prepared and held some stuff back in preparation for that game, thinking we could get by, and we didn't. So that could be sometimes a cautionary tale. And I think that's one of the reasons why when I went back and watched, I thought, this is kind of vanilla. Maybe there's some things too that they didn't want to show that they're going to introduce next week, and seeing how Texas adjusts to it. So that was my first thought going back, watching the tape. The other thought was, this whole 2-quarterback system. I personally have never been a fan of it for this reason, is you're making all 10 players adjust. Everyone else has to adjust besides the quarterback for whoever it is when you're trying to run two. You either have a guy in there who's, in Davis Warren's case, probably going to run more of a conventional offense from the pocket, et cetera. If Alex Orji is going in, it's probably more run dominant, et cetera. But everyone else has to adjust to their cadence, their leadership, all those intangibles, their pocket presence, the timing with the football, how they're holding on to it, their type of styles of plays you're running, the different football they're throwing too, if you're a receiver or pass catcher. So I've never been a fan of it from that standpoint, is interjecting that into your team. And then in the locker room standpoint is, you and I both know college football and really football in general, there's two people that everyone looks to when adversity strikes. It's the head coach and the quarterback. When you got two, you're naturally creating potential fractions within your locker room when that adversity does strike. And there's not that one voice. It's funny, like we never say that with coaches when adversity strikes. Like the coach has to stand up and say something. And if he doesn't, they're going to can him. And they're going to put someone else in there who will, right? But for some reason with quarterbacks, we try to make it seem like, oh, this can work. It'll be copacetic. So I've never been a fan of it. I think you have to kind of pick your lane and go with it. And if it's not Davis Warren, if it doesn't work out, then you go to Alex. If it is Alex, go with that. If it doesn't work out, go to Davis Warren. But I've always been a big believer in, like, put the guy out there that you feel like gives you on every single play throughout the game the best chance to win. And we'll see if that happens this week.
And the fascinating part for me is going into watching the film, I'm sitting there and I'm preparing for this two quarterback system in my head. I'm like, okay, let's watch these guys play. And, Orji plays 9 snaps total and 2 in the first half. And I was like, oh, wait. This is just a limited package of plays that this guy comes in and runs. Very similar, by the way, to the team that we saw in week 1, and a guy that actually got more than that, in Bo Pribula for Penn State. He came in and did a little bit. Now he played more at the end in kind of mop-up duty, but I do wonder in the back of my head if you can get away with this, if you're internally saying to yourself, Davis Warren is our starter, but we have this other guy that has to get on the field, and they play two very different roles within the system. Now, your point about everyone else adjusting, all the other players, the 10 on the field, is an excellent point. And that's why, yes, I'm with you. I'm not ultimately a fan, partly because I'm a quarterback and most of us are narcissists. And so we just want to be on the field anyways, right? Like, I know you're laughing a little bit, but like, you just want, like, don't take me off the field.
It's true. I'm laughing because it's true. Yeah, I'm with you.
And so there's obviously a little bit of that going on. When I watch that film, here's what I'll say. When Davis Warren is the quarterback, it reminds me so much of the early Harbaugh teams that Michigan had 2015, 2016. There's not a lot of dynamic play on the field, but it's serviceable and they wear you down kind of eventually. And you saw that there was a lot of mistakes early in the game. Then they put together a drive late in the game and end up pulling away. I just don't know if a team can beat Texas playing that way. That's what remains to be seen, because I think Texas is an elite team.
Okay, so I think Texas is, but this will be the game that helps me truly believe that they are, because I think this game comes down to two things. For me, we know what Michigan's identity is, and the challenge, and really what this game's all about, is Sharon Moore is taking over now for Jim Harbaugh, and it's the question of, can he continue to run this program the way Jim Harbaugh did, where your identity is defense, and on offense, you're going to run the football, and you're going to grind them down, and you're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, because that's really what's at play here. The only problem with that is, if you look at the past 2 years, and so tired of hearing the Connor Stallion stuff, and that's why Michigan had success. So we don't need to go into that. But, and one of the reasons why I hate it is because it discredits J.J. McCarthy.
That's right.
When J.J. McCarthy was called upon, he stepped up and made a play. And that's what we're going to find out about this Michigan team. Because if Sharon Moore wants to run a system very similar and run this program just like Harbaugh did, then he's going to have a quarterback the way they look to be playing right now. One of these two is going to have to step up and be that guy when called upon. He's got to deliver that throw on third down. And he's going to have to deliver that throw in a 2-minute drive and that big play to make something happen, or take off with his legs, make something happen. That's the reality of what won Michigan the national championship last year and took them to the playoff 2 years ago. It was those plays by J.J. McCarthy, to me, combined with what they had offensively up front and running the football and that defense. So that's really what I'm curious to see, if Michigan is going to be able to find and execute. And then on the flip side, for me, it's about Texas's defense, in particular, their 2 defensive tackles,
Yes,
who are now gone to the NFL. Because Michigan's sitting there saying, we know what you want to do. We're just going to make sure we're going to test out and see how good the interior of your defense is. And if you can stop the power, the counters, all the different schemes that we're going to throw your way in the run game without T'Vondre Sweat, without Byron Murphy. And obviously no disrespect to, Texas' opponent last week. It's going to be a different challenge this week when you see Michigan on the field in a real live game scenario, and you have to have those run fits on point and the personnel to do it. And they don't have those game records, I don't believe, now in the interior of their defense. So that's what this game's all about, in my opinion. We're going to find out, to your point, like, is Texas part of that elite conversation of teams we're seeing right now?
And tell you what's fascinating to me is that last year Texas was able to get away with playing in the vein. And this is the last thing I'll say, and then Brady will let you go. And I appreciate you being on, man. I really do. Texas wants, at least their coordinator, Pete Kwiatkowski, his history is he wants to be an open middle of the field coverage guy. He wants to have 2 safeties back, and he doesn't want to give up the big play. A few years ago, it burned him because teams like Oklahoma State could just run the football on him, and they ended up beating Texas. Now, last year, he could do that because he had great defensive tackles. So you can play 2 safeties back when you've got great defensive tackles. And without those guys, can you really stop the Michigan run game with 2 safeties back? Because it's against his nature to drop down. Now, he will. I'm not saying that he won't, but I'm just saying like that he wants to keep them back. And if you watch the Fresno State game, there was not a snap of football that Fresno State, at least that I can remember, didn't have run ratios, or at least a guy creeping down, at least looking at the run ratios in order to be the unblocked player in the defensive run front. I'm sure there's a snap here or there where they played too deep, but certainly not something that they were trying to sit in. That, to me, becomes the game. If Texas can sit there and stop the run, then it's going to be lights out for Michigan. But if they've got to drop their safety and get out of what they want to do, then it becomes a much bigger question, because that's when Colston Loveland could get one-on-one coverage and Michigan can potentially throw the ball a little bit. That's what I'll be looking for.
It's interesting that you say that, because I always felt like Pete Kwiatkowski, going back to his days at Washington, right? I thought he played more post-high safety then because the cornerbacks that they had the Kevin Kings of the world and people like that, who they could isolate on islands and be able to put that extra defender down in the box. But a different time, different team, different personnel. And I think, to your point, you hear about, everyone gap integrity. Well, gap and a half is what you can play when you have a T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, where those guys can cheat. And I think one of the things that I'll look to see if Pete Kwiatkowski does is, not that Michigan's going to try to spread you out oftentimes, but when Orji's in, sometimes you might not, you might be surprised if they do try to spread him out to get him a lighter box to run the football. But if they cheat, if they're cheating, whether it's out in the slot with that nickel defender or however they go about cheating with one of the safeties, to be able to have him essentially responsible for a gap, even though he's still trying to play back, for more depth, because they're not concerned about the passing game of Michigan. I mean, right now, no one scares you outside of Cortland Loveland on that Michigan offense as far as creating a big play. And so again, that's another thing, is like, this is a great opportunity for Michigan and for one of those guys to emerge. Otherwise, to your point, it could be a long day. Like, Texas could be able to put up some big plays, some big numbers versus this Michigan team.
Brady, I appreciate your time, man. I can't wait to see you guys and the show and everything that you've got going on. Again, Big Noon Kickoff, 9 a.m. Eastern, 3-hour edition, live from Ann Arbor. I appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that'll do it for Brady, and that'll do it for us. Appreciate you watching. Again, subscribe on YouTube. Make sure that you're there. We're going to have some extra YouTube content, some Michigan film coming out this week. Our preview episodes are coming out tomorrow on Thursday. I break down my games last week. 5-1 against the spread. That's all I'm going to say. 5-1 against the spread. Wherever you're listening, go ahead, rate, review us, do all that fun stuff. And listen, enjoy your Wednesday night, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.